In 1906, President Teddy Roosevelt, an avid hunter and naturalist, signed into law an executive order to establish the National Wildlife Refuge System. With the stroke of a pen, he set into motion the world's largest network of lands set aside for the benefit of wildlife. In our next story, we'll introduce you to Gray's Lake, a national wildlife refuge in eastern Idaho that's truly a waterfowl wonderland.
Gray's Lake is a real jewel and a unique piece of habitat that needs to be protected. It is so productive and so unique in terms of its size. It has tremendous potential to produce wildlife, and that in and of itself is a real good reason for protecting it and giving it special attention.
This huge marshland has been protected as a national wildlife refuge since 1965. It's part of a system of over 400 refuges nationwide, 6 of which you'll find right here in Idaho.
I think we'll find a lot here at Gray's Lake. It's certainly an area where you aren't overrun with people, you don't have a lot of problems with crowds, you can be by yourself. You have to face some tough weather such as we're dealing with today.
The weather is typical for a high mountain valley that is typically unpredictable. Nestled in the Caribou Range of the Northern Rockies, Gray's Lake sits at an elevation of 6,400 feet. This means long winters and sluggish springs. Today, the marsh is veiled in a slow-moving mass of dark gray clouds that produces gentle, intermittent rains. The rain has no effect on the primary residents of Gray's Lake. From ducks and geese to stately shorebirds, the marsh is alive with waterfowl. Almost 200 different species of birds can be found in the refuge at one time or another. This colorful character is called an eared grebe, named for the golden tufts fanning out behind the eye. This distinctive plumage only appears during the spring breeding season. Nearby, a white-faced ibis uses its long, curved bill to probe for crustaceans, insects, and small fish, making its way delicately through the rushes. A spat breaks out between 2 male coots over the favors of a nearby female. Eventually, the challenger is driven off in a flurry of feathers. Cruising high above it all is a northern harrier, sometimes called a marsh hawk, searching for prey. A pair of Canada geese flies off, honking boisterously and disturbing the stillness of the marsh. In the tall grasses, a small blackbird perches confidently on a slender stalk that seems too delicate to bear even the minuscule weight of the bird. A mix of trumpeter swans and sandhill cranes share the shoreline. The trumpeters are fighting their way back from near extinction. These swans are probably the offspring of nesting pairs transplanted to the marsh in 1989 and 90. But the cranes are a common sight here. In fact, Gray's Lake holds the distinction of hosting the world's largest nesting concentration of greater sandhill cranes. The cranes are large birds, long-legged and long-necked, with a wingspan stretching to 7 feet. They have a distinctive call that can be heard over a mile away. Spring is a mating season, and for a moment, it looks as though we may be treated to a lively display of the courtship dance. But before it even gets going, the cranes seem to lose interest and drift away. Eventually, they will mate and lay up to 2 eggs on flat nests like this, bringing off a brood that will follow them like small shadows throughout the summer. Finally, in the fall, they'll migrate south to their wintering grounds in New Mexico. The success of the sandhill cranes at Grays Lake inspired an idea for an experiment to try and preserve its cousin, the whooping crane, from extinction.
In the early to mid-70s, a whooping crane experiment was started, which consisted of bringing eggs in from the wild population of whooping cranes that migrate between Texas and Canada. And eggs were brought into Grays Lake from Canada and placed in sandhill crane nests so that the sandhills would act as a foster parent, so to speak, for the whooping cranes.
The idea worked to a certain extent. The sandhills raised the whooping crane young and taught them new migration routes. The thought was that if a natural disaster, such as a hurricane, were to wipe out the tiny wild population of whooping cranes in Texas, these would remain to carry on. Unfortunately, they didn't carry on. That is, the whoopers raised by sandhills never mated with other whooping cranes. In the late 80s, the fostering experiment was discontinued. Today, only 4 whooping cranes raised at Grays Lake still remain in the population.
And what will happen in terms of the present efforts to come up with another experiment, another approach to managing them is unknown at this time.
Despite the mixed results of the whooping crane experiment, it did provide an opportunity to bring the wonders of Grays Lake to the attention of the bird-watching public. And more important, it once more reinforced the premise of preservation initiated by President Teddy Roosevelt when he created the National Wildlife Refuge System.
I think that it's absolutely critical that you maintain places like Grays Lake for wildlife, and that wildlife has something that is done strictly for it. And from that, we both protect that wildlife resource and we learn so much more. And we will learn even more in the future by that approach, I believe.